Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Seddon and Laceys Comic Stash. That there is Seddon, I'm Lacey, and this week we are doing our experience are as a comic fan through the eras. So it'll be a little bit of when we were kids, teenagers, and now.
So we're a combination of kids and teenagers is now.
Just
we have certainly not grown up. Just our bodies have given up on us.
I've just gone grey. This wasn't as grey when I was a kid.
And I imagine there was less hair when you were a kid at certain points. I can't imagine you come out like that hairy. Or I can't imagine, maybe.
No, the 90s was curtains.
Oh, I did curtains as well. I think because in my head, well, I say in my head, in actual fact, they were very easy to do, weren't they? And, I was very much easy, please.
Yeah. So, you think Steve McManaman, that was where my hair was.
I try not to. I did try and do the long hair thing at one point, but I tried to transition from curtains into long hair, and I found that, and it wasn't that long, but at a certain length, not very long, it started to curl up, and I started to look like someone from someone from like Scooby Doo, like a female 1970s cartoon character. So I found I had to get rid of that, and maybe I could have rocked it, but I don't think so. I was trying to impress girls at that time, and that wasn't working for me. I'll be honest.
So, as is now tradition, we go into Reading Corner.
I'm going to stop giggling, but I just love it. I love the title, and it's so simple, but it makes me think of Naughty Corner, and of course it makes me think of Blair Witch, Reading Corner.
So I will start and confess that because the real world life and all the other shit that goes with it, I have not actually had a chance to do fuck all this week. I was meant to be planning on finishing 1602 and starting Visions, but yeah, fuck you everything and taking all my time away.
We were talking about this before we started recording, and it's something that's worth mentioning here is that it's a real shame as well, isn't it? Because we've said in other episodes, this has really reinvigorated my love for actually reading. I hadn't lost my love for comics, but I think I've been reading a lot less over the last few years, and this has really pumped me up. I want to read more. We talk about stuff like I want to read more. I want to read this. In fact, if anything, like you were saying about the wish list, the list becomes so long, I don't think I've got enough hours in the day to do it. But sometimes you just kind of hit that logjam in life where you go, I either don't have time to read right now, or my reading is going to be negatively impacted by all the crap going on, and I'm not going to enjoy it as much as I am. So yeah, it's a real shame when we don't get to kind of hunker down and binge read a series or binge read whatever we're going through at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those I'd quite happily at any point last week just turned the world off, gone fuck today. I'm staying in bed with tea and my books.
If only the world could lock down, that's.
Those heady days of 2002 and 2020.
Yeah.
When I didn't have to leave the house.
Yeah.
Didn't have to work for a few weeks until I got me a laptop. It was a beautiful time. I replayed Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, God.
Enough about me and my reminiscing of
those heady days of less than 2 years ago. Yeah. So for me in the Reading Corner, I've mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. I've carried on with Strange Adventure, and I'm still really liking it. I said to you, Chris, I haven't finished it yet, but very much because of what we just said, I felt like I was a little bit too distracted from it, and I probably wasn't going to appreciate it as much as I would. So after reading a couple more issues, I went, I'm liking this, but this goes to one side until I've got a bit of clearer time to be able to do it. And instead, based off inspirationally our own podcast, I read loads of X-Men this week, and I read lots of X-Men from the eras that we were talking about. I dipped into... I really went on a bit of a scattergun approach of looking at covers of issues of Uncanny from the Claremont era that I had, and if I had a reaction when I looked at the cover, like it kind of went, oh God, I remember that issue, I was just dipping in and reading them, and really enjoyed it. But yeah, so a bit of a stale reading corner, and I don't want to go too much into the Claremont X-Men because hopefully people will read it based off of the show we had last week. But yes, old school stuff and just a little bit forward in Strange Adventure. But fingers crossed, and I think this is fingers crossed for both of us, we should both get a better time to clear a few more things down in our reading lists. It's something that I think potentially we'll look at as a show in the future of maybe doing something along the lines of top 5 things we haven't read, but we really want to get down to. Yeah. Kind of maybe our top 5
list,
our guilty secrets or something like that, or like the things that we just never got round to that we want to. But yeah, so reading corner, not a lot of reading in our corners, unfortunately.
Yeah, as I said, I've got obviously 1602 we finished, and I'm into Visions, and then comes the real question of what next after that, because obviously I've got my Batmans that I got for Christmas, I've got The Crow. The other half in the last 2 weeks has bought the Ultimate collection of Doctor Strange and the Ultimate collection of Spider-Man. So I've got her Silver Surfer Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, as well as my Daredevil one and everything else that I got for Christmas. So I've got a fuck ton in the house to read.
I think you should sneak a bit of DC in, because there's you've done a lot of Marvel recently, and there's a lot of Marvel obviously in that list. So I think maybe dipping into maybe the Joker War or something like that to refresh your. I don't want to turn you into a full Marvel boy here. You know, I want you to stay. I want your DC origins to stay.
Oh, you know you'll never get rid of the Batman.
Well, unless Disney buy DC as well, or Warner, and then who knows, they might become one.
Just had a thought that'll be going in the list later, but when it comes out, we're doing a special on the Batman film. But that's for another time in a few months.
That's for another time. I might even go to the cinema for that one. Like that might be my return to the outside world for things like movies.
Going to the out.
Yes.
So what we are doing for today is, as I said earlier, experiences as fans of the comic book genre through the decades, and how we feel about it as a thing, and also how the outside world view us with what we do. So we will start when we were teeny tiny kinder.
As we know, you were still hairy, so that's no, with curtains now.
when you'd go to the tiny little corner shop, and there was an array of comic books, because news agents were a thing, and it was an easier time. Was it more accepted back then for kids of our generation to go into school with a Beano, a Dandy, a Batman, a Marvel, whatever? Because I will chuck Beano and Dandy in, because of our generation, that was predominantly what us as British kids were reading as comics. Because I remember being 8, 9, 10 in like middle school, everyone would have something different, and it would go around the class because everyone knew who bought what each week, and it would be shared around the group.
That was one of the things I kind of thought would be good as well, because you can generalize this stuff a lot, but I think maybe you and I we'll see, like, might have had kind of very different experiences with it. It might be like the area you're in and stuff like that. Certainly, I'm glad you picked up Beano and Dandy. So I think for me in those early years of getting into, let's go with superheroes, because I did read Beano, Dandy. Wizard and Chips was a big one for me, but there was always this strange, and I found it strange when I looked back at it. I probably didn't twig it at the time, but this strange stigma to superhero stuff. It just never took off where I was. So kids would think nothing of coming in talking about Beano, Dandy, Wizard and Chips, Roy of the Rovers. Was it Dare or Eagle? And things like that. Like those kind of things that we would see in a newsagent. And I remember things like that being passed around, but there was no superhero in the world, in the universe I was in, a universe in Essex, Maybe that's why, but yeah, there wasn't this superhero culture, and even from very, very early on. I mean, I remember I've said this on the Origin show about Secret Wars being this really big thing to get me in, and it was a UK reprint. But I remember being at like the gates after school and stuff like that, and like my mum had come and picked us up, and she picked up my Secret Wars on the way in, and I was like so excited. I was showing people the cover, and people were looking at me like weirdo. That's not like what we read, and I'd say that certainly the acceptability of comic books seemed to lean very heavily into UK comic books. If it was published in the UK, written in the UK, if it had Dennis the Menace anywhere near it, people seem to not bat an eyelid. But as soon as I tried to introduce any superhero stuff, I from very early on, it was no, not for me. And I learned, and this is the shame, and I guess this is something that all kids kind of get with hobbies or things like that, is I learned to shut up about it. I didn't talk about it. We're gonna cover this a lot for this, but Dirty Little Secret was my thing. I never spoke out loud about my superhero love, because I knew that no one else either loved them, or at that time they would look at me weird. And I was a sporty kid, so like I played football, I was in all the football teams and stuff like that. So I was kind of accepted, but then I was like, well, yeah, I'm accepted, but I don't want to not be accepted when I tell them I've got this thing that they don't like, or that they're not into. So yeah, it was very different for me. I didn't get that experience with my superhero stuff.
See, the thing is, you've got to remember, I'm a little bit younger than you, shall we say?
Yeah.
That when I was there, the Batman films had been out.
Yeah.
The TV shows were on. The superhero, I think I caught the right time that superheroes were then in the norm in the UK, whereas obviously in the States had never gone anywhere and had always been there, but had become more the norm. So
I mean, mine
were coming out in the early 90s. I'm in 92, I'm 8, 9, and you've got Batman's on telly, you've got I think Fantastic Four show started, there's a Spider-Man cartoon on, so you've got the cartoons relating to the heroes, but again, it's still got your Beanos, your Dandies, your Roy of the Rovers, your very English stuff, which I would say 70% of the kids were more into that than the superhero stuff. Ooh. But there was a appetite and a desire for the superhero stuff a bit more.
It's strange, and I think this will come up at other parts of this, but people were watching Batman, the TV show, like, because it was on repeat. It was a beautiful thing. You went on school holidays, Batman was on every day, amazing. People watch Batman, and we talk about the Batman TV show. Like when you're in the playground, you were kapowing and zapping everyone that you could get your hands on. The Superman movies are out there, and I think generally 1 and 2 were again fondly loved because they're on TV a lot. 3 not so much for a lot of others, but they're idiots because 3 is amazing. It didn't permeate anything else. That was a TV show and those were movies, and there wasn't necessarily an acknowledgement that they existed in any other format. And I think when you suggested them there, and again, we were kids, but I would hear people kind of go, "What are you reading that for? That's for kids." Yeah, I'm a kid. That's what I'm reading it. And you've got a Beano. That is also for kids. But So we hadn't hit the. Well, I say that. I mean, as I say, there's a few years on it. I mean, I'm in high school when we start to get to the first Batman movie, and I think there's a we're talking about like this as fandom. That's where I think I first noticed somewhat of a shift in the public consciousness of fandom of superheroes, but again didn't permeate into anything beyond movies or for me and the people I knew. So everyone would talk about Batman the movie at school. Everyone was talking about how brilliant it was, like the Joker, any line that the Joker said in the movie was quoted in every circumstance that you potentially could. As a lover of the music of Prince, it was amazing because I actually heard my friends listening to Prince because he did the soundtrack, whereas I couldn't have convinced him to listen to a Prince track before that. But still no one started reading the comics, and I still couldn't talk about the comics. Or I say I couldn't. I chose not to talk about the comics because I felt like I don't know. I felt like it wouldn't play very well. Or even suggesting to people, like, you know, I didn't even feel like I was in a position to kind of go, oh, do you know what? They do loads of comics on this. You know, give it a read. You might like it. Because, as I say, this was a movie. And also, I think because we're at high school age, it probably was more for me and the people that were around me. You couldn't get into read a fucking book either at that stage because, you know, we were, we're too cool for that shit. Like only geeks read, and you know, like so. I think, probably timings wise, that's probably impactful from my experience of the fandom around there. Is and we had the cartoons at that point, and I'll be honest, like I loved those cartoons. I loved the Batman animated. I loved the X-Men with Fantastic Four. You know, we've talked about all these before, but I think the people I was hanging around with were probably of an age where. I bet those little bastards watched it at home,
but they wouldn't admit it.
Yeah, they didn't say it out loud. But even those ones that watched it at home, again, it didn't really permeate into them going, "Let's talk about superheroes beyond what we'd seen in the movie or what we'd seen in a cartoon."
Yeah, so obviously for me, when we're sort of looking high school stuff at sort of late 90s, that was very much like you would not talk about it at that point.
Yeah,
because all the good TV shows has gone except X-Men. But again, it's that sort of thing of being 14, 15, 16. You watch cartoons.
Yeah.
What else am I going to have when I'm eating my breakfast?
Well, it was years later that I met my better half and love her to bits for so many things, but and this wasn't, we didn't have this conversation when we first met, but I think we've been going out a while, and I think you slowly start to kind of meet out things in your life, don't you?
Yeah.
And I just remember one day, like we were just talking about our school days and stuff like that, and she went, she said, "Do you know what? I really wasn't very good at school." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then she went, "Yeah." She said, I wasn't the slightest bit interested in coming home doing homework. I just wanted to watch Thundercats. And I was just like, right, you're the one for me. You know, like, this is fine. This is we're good here.
But yeah, so for me, the teenage part was very much like you wouldn't speak about it. Like Beano's Dandy, I think by that point it were dying out anyway. Sort of the late 90s, early 2000s.
Had we hit when we're talking about like kind of the multimedia stuff? Had we hit the bad Batman movies by that point?
Yeah. Like, so you've had the bad Batman movies. Blade had come out, but no one knew that Blade was a comic film.
Yeah.
They were just like, this is Wesley Snipes as a badass vampire.
Oh, and I think a lot of people would have called bullshit if you'd have said it as a comic. Even if you walked up and put a comic in their face, I reckon they'd gone, "No, it's not a comic."
And obviously you'd have had The Crow by then as well. But again, that's not a comic film.
Well, I mean, like,
it is.
And again, to equate this to kind of like fandom and our experience of it, you could argue that those animated series and the original Burton Batman probably did shift fandom into a bit more of an acceptable, and a fandom of superheroes into a bit more of a mainstream thing. But yeah, the Schumacher Batman, things like that, I think it killed it for years, didn't it? Almost that little bit of light that had been shined on it by these things was destroyed because it was all of a sudden seen as bad, campy, for kids, schlocky, not well written, and you just went, you destroyed a lot of good work that people spent 4 or 5 years doing in multimedia.
Yeah, and sort of that period, sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, other than the couple of badass films that no one would know were superhero films, it was dead. You know.
See, and again, it's strange because we're looking at this trajectory of it, and so that period is the first and one of the only periods of my fandom where I could talk about it out loud. Yeah. So that late 90s was speculator boom time. Now, don't get me wrong. As I say, the latter Batman movies did a lot of harm, but kind of the image creators as they were known to be, but like the multi-selling X-Men books, X-Force books, those started to actually permeate, and again probably the age that we were, but my friends, and they become interested because all of a sudden they heard that there's this thing that you could buy for less than £2 that could be worth thousands of pounds, and then they started to get interested in it. And I think initially I was almost kind of duped because I think I thought they got interested in it. So they'd pick up some of the issues. We'd go to Ace Comics and we'd buy stuff, and we'd talk about it a bit. But I probably was too naive and dumb to kind of realise that I was talking about it a lot, whereas they were kind of going, I read that. But a lot of this stuff was being put in cupboards, ready to make our fortunes very shortly afterwards. And so, as I say, I finally kind of had, and it ostensibly it was pretty much the same group of friends with sort of people coming and going as I'd had through a lot of my life. But yeah, this was the first time where, as a fan and in fandom, I felt like it become acceptable, but it was a strange level of acceptability because the acceptability was this is a cash cow, and I realised that they weren't getting into it for the stories, for the art, for anything like that. It was here we go, here is an investment. But as quickly as that boom came, probably much in the same way as the real world, the crash came really quickly, and then I had a load of friends who were really pissed off because they had cupboards full of comics that were worth nothing, or probably cover price, but then all of a sudden they were kind of, well, we don't really have much money, like we were doing this on pocket money or part-time like weekend jobs, and we've just blown all this money on that, and it's not going to allow us to make our fortunes. But yeah, there was a brief period towards that tail end of the 90s where fandom was fun with others for the first time for me.
Yeah, so I think that when the speculator stuff happened was the awkward teenage years for me. It wasn't really the thing. I mean, there was a couple of kids that you'd see in school that would be reading the comics and they'd get fucking rinsed.
Yeah.
And one of them, when I was in sixth form, it was like same bunch of kids, but most of the arseholes didn't go to sixth form because of course they didn't. They all wanted to get out of school as quick as possible. Some of them were like, they'd be sitting there in the sixth room, common room, sort of reading stuff. And at that point, I'm like, what, fuck it. Don't care anymore. And I'd go and speak to them about it. And that's how I found Killing Joke and went from there. But that period, in theory, I should have loved it.
Yeah.
Because that was the point when Spawn started. You had Blade, you had a load of start runs because obviously when it was the speculator market was a point when there was lots of number ones.
Yeah.
Well, and I just wasn't willing at that point, I think, because of being an awkward teenager. Because I was awkward enough as it is because I like metal and wanted to listen to heavy stuff where everyone else wouldn't. That it's just another weird thing to sort of be like, oh, really is a weird kid.
We said about fandom, but we said we're coming at this with a bit of a kind of eye on UK fandom, and I think in this period, so the 90s, I think we do see a shift come what may. It might not have necessarily impacted us or impacted us in different ways, but I think because of the movies and because of the speculator market, and you did start to see specialised comic books opening in, albeit big places at first, but then smaller places, I think it does at least become part of the consciousness. I think we are still dotted around in small percentages there, but I think there is a fandom all of a sudden in this country, or there is a bigger fandom all of a sudden in this country that can sustain shops and can sustain it as a, let's say, I was going to say genuine hobby. Genuine sounds a bit bad, but a genuine hobby that has enough of a fan base that that it's worth them shipping the comics over to this country.
Yeah. Obviously, you then got the noughties. Obviously, at this point, I've just started working. I go to fucking loads of gigs and drink lots, so I'm not really the one to then be going out and reading and buying stuff. But it's that point that I realised there's a little comic book shop in the indoor market in Norwich that gets everything in. So I sort of dip my toe in and I start reading a few bits here and there, but it's not anywhere near the sort of buying loads of stuff or going in. And it is literally the odd issue here and there of random things of if I like the cover. But that at that point, it wasn't. I think because I was in my late teens, early 20s, and the people that I worked with were slightly older because I was working in a pub at the time. I was working. That they were like, yeah, we read comics as kids, and it was just one of those of, oh, what are they doing now? What do they look like now? And they'd sort of steal it off me in at work and have a scan through and sort of look what it was. And it was much more accepting for that period. But I think because once you've left school, you're not in that I need to impress tier group.
You don't feel like you're beholden to people anymore, do you? Like, and you know, you can pick and choose who you see a lot more. And that sounds mean, but you know, you just are. You know, you're going to work, and when you finish work, you're
only going to go out for a beer with the people that you like.
Yeah, and you know, like you're probably going to start leaning into friend groups that do share interests with you and do share sort of common, not just interest, but like that common hobbies thing of going, like, you know, if I wanted to go to the comic shop, I'd go on my own. It's fine, but you know, it's kind of nice if you went with someone else. And I think there's something key you said there. You know, like you get into the noughties for certainly for both of us, we're earning money at this point, and I, much like you said, a lot of that money got siphoned off into going out and to beer vouchers, but there was income there, so I could buy more than I ever had done before without it impacting my pocket so much. You know, like I could still afford to eat, I could still afford to go out, and I could pick up a lot more. So I think actually the amount I consumed intensified at that point. I'm trying to equate it to like the outside world though, and wrestling. You know, we are both big wrestling fans, and often it'll come back to wrestling, but I think what we've seen a lot in our experience of wrestling fandom and comic fandom, there are some similarities there. You know, there was big boom periods in the 80s, the 90s, and things like that. But it didn't retain all of its fans, but it retained some of us. And this is what I felt like probably in the noughties with comic books, is that it had as a hobby got its claws into enough people. And, you know, I said like a minute ago, we're dotted in and around there, but it's there now. You know, it is in there. And this is before like the big movies boom.
Yeah.
But it's out there. And I think inevitably, even without their movies boom, we would, for those of us that breed and for those, but, you know, we suddenly had other people coming into our life. So, you know, kids would start appearing a bit later, don't get me wrong. But because it always got its claws in, we were going to get our kids to read it, or like our nieces, our nephews and things like that. So I feel like this is an important almost consolidation period of fandom where it retained enough of us and it kept to the interest of enough of us for it to survive in the UK through to, I guess, the next boom period.
I think the other thing with this one was, because, again, we're equating it back to wrestling, obviously, the Attitude Era being the big one. You would see fucking randoms in Austin 316 t-shirts and Rock t-shirts. And then once the wrestling boom died, you started to get a lot more, I will call it geek wear, but it would be either TV show stuff or comic book logos. So you'd see Captain America Shield t-shirts, the Punisher shirts, a Shazam shirt. Yeah,
the Flash things. I think that was the first.
Seeing a lot more of just the generic comic logo shirt starts becoming a thing that you see around, and you're seeing them on. And again, I shouldn't sort of stereotype that, but you're seeing them on people that you would look at and go, "Really?"
Yeah.
And you know, they may have just bought it because they like the design, but you're hoping that, you know, they're part of the secret club.
Ooh. It's strange when you say that, because I think the first comic book T-shirt, and I say the first comic book T-shirt, the first comic book T-shirt I bought that wasn't kind of bought for me when I was a kid or stuff like that, or I didn't really have any knowledge of, was a Flash one. And it was a Flash one because, you know, the Flash is like kind of the yellow lightning symbol, bit of a white background, red T-shirt, and I was not bold enough, brave enough, I guess, to kind of go out there. Like, I wouldn't have gone out there at that time with like a Hulk T-shirt and stuff like that. But I got it because exactly what you said there of going, most people wouldn't have even known what it was. But it had kind of like, I don't know, like let's go with the term cool. It had a cool symbol on it. And I thought, well, I can wear this and people will just go, oh yeah, that's fine, without judging me, because they don't know what they'd be judging me for. Yeah. I think they probably just thought, oh, it's a new design or a new designer or something like that. And I felt like I could it was almost like trying to sneak my fandom out there by going, yeah, you guys don't know. You're not judging me because you don't know what it is, but you should be, well, you would be judging me if you knew what it was.
See, my one was a Punisher shirt, because obviously, as you've normally seen me on here, I'm in like Slayer and Metallica t-shirts and lots of metal band shirts. A skull with the 4 lines at the bottom. Yeah, it's just a metal band shirt.
Fits that motif very well, doesn't it?
Like, but at the same point, if you know, you know.
Well, it's just one of those. It's an interesting one again to like in the fandom. So we're looking at fandom at this point, and we're saying, well, there's probably a very small percentage, but enough of a market out there that are sustaining comic books in this country, or comic book sales in this country. But still, the superhero fandom is mainly based off of, or the knowledge of it is based off of movies. But yeah, you're spot on. You start to see this, the t-shirts, and it permeating like even stuff like you'd see it be part of like furniture's just the wrong word, but you know, like you go into a cool store and you'd see a comic book cover on the wall as a picture, and you go like, how? Because people aren't buying the comic, but yeah, they become almost fashionable, I guess, but fashionable without people actually picking up the core product that it comes from. And this is one of the things that fascinates me about comic book fandom and comic books in general, and we talk about this all the time, but it grabs people's attention so much, but not necessarily in its core format that it comes from. And this really was a big period for me of kind of going, how I remember there being a really good pub near where I worked at the time, and you went to their toilets, and their toilet walls was wallpapered, but it's wallpapered with pages from comic books. And I think probably the owner was a fan of comic books, but people would always talk about how cool is that. And I'd try and sneak in and go, oh yeah, because that's, and I'd say a character, and they go, what's it about? It just looks good, and so I think it's almost that period of a lot of people who probably would talk about it now and say, oh yeah, I was a fan in those times, but actually no, the truth is you just owned the fucking t-shirt, you didn't know what it was actually for.
So because this is obviously pre the MCU stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we start to kind of around this period.
You've got X-Men, you've got the awful Fantastic Four stuff.
But even with the X-Men, I think the X-Men wasn't as much as it was. It was a superhero movie. It was a comics movie. I think the terminology you would hear is this is a superhero movie and it is good. Yeah. You wouldn't hear this is a comics movie. And I think a lot of people were almost like, well, don't mention it's a comic, because it might not, people might judge me if I say it's a comic one. So we've not gone big into the zeitgeist moment that is to come. But
no, but at this point is when I started to see in actual bookshops sections for graphic novels. Yeah, most of it being little manga and things like that. It's still being much more of the Asian style. But you would start seeing things like The Killing Joke, things like Hush, Civil War. The big standalone centerpiece books.
Absolutely spot on.
You would see, in there.
That's what I was going to say.
Manga stuff.
Like, you would have. We would talk about like Waterstones, but of course that was one of the key ones. But they would have, let's say, 2 reasonably sized shelves full of mangas, and then you'd have maybe a rack of comic books. And you're right, it was the big stories, wasn't it? It was the big Batman stories. And to be honest, I think probably DC got a foothold in that area first, because I think their things like Dark Knight and things like that, I think, stood out on the shelf more. And of course, if you're Waterstones, not knowing whether you've got a big market for it, you're going to go to the ones that had a movie.
Yeah.
So they are going to lean into Batman. But yeah, again, a nice little. I hope that I talk about like our generation of fans and us passing it on to other people, but I think that was probably a decent time for the fandom to grow with people who were younger than us, because that's one of the things about any of these hobbies, isn't it? It's that long-term sustainability. If you don't capture the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, eventually you will die. And if your whole customer base goes, then so that reinventing yourself along the way, or I guess a combination of grabbing the attention of another generation, but without totally alienating those people who are your core customers.
Yeah. So this thing is in the Norwich. Oh, what was it? Oh, is it Beaverbrooks? Used to be the bookshop that then closed down.
Yeah.
They did their marketing, or they've set up their shop properly, because they had the kids stuff, they had the teenage fiction, and they put the manga near that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't in the kids section with the kids stuff, but it's close enough to the kids stuff that when they're looking, they would then see it.
Yeah.
To then, push them onto it, and I was like,
Janet and John into Battle Royale. I feel like that's a natural transition for any child.
But that was the thing. It was because they, at the same point, the one in Norwich anyway, had game in there as well. So they had the young kids books, the teen fiction, the comics, then game.
Yeah.
So if you were coming in to buy games, you would see the comics and be like, "Oh, Batman." And if you're there, so it was done where, marketing wise and as a shop thing, gets more cross eyes on it to interest people in it. And you're hoping that sort of thing got people's eyes onto it.
I'd still say though, like for me at this point, it's a dirty little secret still.
Yeah, it is.
Now when I say that, like I've got some years on me at this point, so I don't give a crap anymore. I'm trying to swear less. See what I did there? But I don't care. Like, I'm not really out there to impress people and all these sort of things. But I think it retains a dirty little secret because I just didn't have people in my life that had that interest.
Yeah.
So it was almost like no one wants to be like going out for dinner with someone talking at them for 4 hours about like an issue of Batman when you go, I don't like Batman. So I knew that wasn't like really anyone to talk about with it. So I still didn't talk about it much. I wouldn't talk about it openly because there just wasn't. And again, maybe it's geographically, but or maybe I was really bad at choosing friends. But I just didn't have that there. So yeah, I'm still in dirty little secret phase for me.
See, this is the point where I wasn't reading mainstream Marvel. I wasn't even reading Batman, but V for Vendetta had come out.
Yeah.
And obviously they'd put the comics next to the DVDs when Batman came out. So I was getting those sort of things and Watchmen and the stuff that wasn't quote unquote superhero.
Yeah. But was a comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would sit there in the pub when wasn't working, reading through V for Vendetta and stuff or through Watchmen. And the punters would sort of come up and ask you about it and be like, a grown-up comic, and have that sort of thing there because it still was superheroes, kids.
And comics are for kids, even that term there. Grown-up comic, comics are something that kids do. And that sort of permeated all the way through, like all of these periods up to here is comic books, especially superheroes, are for kids. They're not for anyone but kids.
I wouldn't have sat in the pub at work reading a Batman or reading an X-Men or a Captain America or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it would have been, I'd been like, what the fuck is that? You're a child.
Yeah.
Not that I'd give a fuck, because I never do, but
yeah,
there's that was still...
Well, I mean, more so you'd avoid it because you didn't want to have that conversation with someone, did you? You didn't want to have to go, no, I'm not a child, and go through that because you just think, I don't care about what you think, but because you said it directly to me, I now feel like I need to defend this thing when I don't care about your opinion whatsoever.
So we then hit Iron Man. And you know all of a sudden, everyone seems to know about superheroes.
Well, I wonder, and again, I think this is something that we will do at some point. Like, we'll do something around the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I don't know what format it will be, but like even at first, so Iron Man. I'm trying to remember like what order we had. Iron Man 2 in that period.
Hulk, there was a Hulk, wasn't it? There was a Hulk that came out first, which was the Edward Norton one.
Yeah,
that's then not canon. Then Iron Man. I mean, then Iron Man 2, and then was the redo of Hulk.
Yeah. I feel like it's Avengers that's the big changing point for me in fandom. So I think, but I think the layers are put there with Iron Man, Captain America in that time and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, as a fan and my fandom, I was just gobsmacked. You know, I was like, oh my God, they're making these movies. Now, I went into them with a lot of trepidation because I thought these are not going to play well because I'd seen them on the page and I thought you can't make these look good enough that an audience of the people who don't read these comics are going to, but somehow they, bless them, their little cotton socks, they managed to do it, and I think they managed to make them interesting, and I think it blew the fandom much wider because I think all of a sudden people went, wow, there's something in this. These stories are good, and these characters are good. But I will again say, these stories are good movies. They're not buying comics, but yeah, I think there's still a bit of a bubbling under there where I think probably even some people going to the cinema for some of them was just a bit like, oh, I'll put my collar up just in case like enemy friends, like because again it hadn't quite got into that. But I think when we hit the Avengers, and God, still amazed to say it was an Avengers movie, I think that's where everything changes. The game changes at that point because I think that movie does obviously gangbusters, and I think you realise that I'll focus on the UK. In the UK, there is a mass audience for these characters, and for other characters that they will potentially release. And you know, we said about merchandising earlier. Well, it ain't just T-shirts anymore, is it? You know, you can't go to a takeaway shop without having Cap, Thor, Iron Man on a cup. You can't go into a store anywhere near Christmas without there being pencil cases with them on and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, it goes through the roof. Like this blows superhero fandom from. I talked about the boom period earlier. Like the boom period was nothing compared to this for public consciousness. You know, everyone's talking about these characters, and I know I'll jump back to you because I know you were just about to sort of say, but because I do think it's a really valid point and everyone knows all about superheroes all of a sudden.
Yeah, so you come out of the films and everyone knows everyone's backstory and who these characters are and all this. You're like, since when? Where have you known all this from? And it was a point when a lot of people outed themselves as comic readers. And you're like, where were all you lot?
We were all hunkered in our reading corners, Chris.
But at the same point, you've then all got all these people that would have shit on everyone for reading comics, but because now it's a film, they're all in on it as well.
I know it's slightly outside of, I guess, the theory of fandom, but we talked about it and we said like not to stereotype, but you know there was, and maybe it was simpler times, or maybe it is still like this now. I don't know. I'm not a kid growing up now, but you fit probably a few groups, and I think, you know, like people who read comics and stuff like that, you know, they had glasses, bad haircuts, they were antisocial, they sat in rooms, they were pale because, you know, they never left their house and things like that. And I think because that had become a kind of a big stereotype, that's another reason why people didn't almost want to say they were. And as I say, I played football 4 or 5 times a week. I was a big sporty kid and all this sort of thing. I did have glasses because that's just a vision thing, probably from reading too many comic books. My friends would have told me back then, but I kind of didn't fit what even I knew the stereotype of it was. But I couldn't break that. I couldn't go to people, no, you're wrong, because I am a comic fan. But I think this is where maybe a dark side of fandom. So I'd loved comics for a very long time, and I actually found this quite a difficult period because all of a sudden, in theory, I had so many more people to talk to about it because everyone knew about it. But I was actually a little bit annoyed because I was like, where were you fucks? Where were you when I loved this? Where were you when I wanted to talk about it over the years when I was doing it? And I damn well knew, and as much as it was nice to find some of these people who have been stuck in dark reading corners like us, I also know that loads of these people weren't in those dark reading corners. But because it was popular as a movie and it was acceptable now and cool and whatever term you want to use, people were suddenly jumping on it and going, yeah, I know all of this. No, they didn't. They read it on the internet. They found out their stuff from there. And it brought, and I think we'll touch on this actually in a little while when we sort of move forward. And I'll come back to it again, so I won't harp on it too much now. But yeah, there is that part of me that it almost feels like, let's go to football after we've done wrestling. This feels like when Man United suddenly started winning the league. And all of a sudden, all these fair weather fucking Man U fans come out of the woodwork. I've been a Man U fan since I was a kid. No, I grew up with you. You bloody well didn't support Man U, that sort of thing. And it felt like, and the problem is, I think, because that annoyed me, it almost made me rail against it a little bit. Like, and you can almost turn into that arsehole anti-fan, can't you? Where you all of a sudden, for years, you've been dreaming of being able to have a conversation out loud about this. But now I didn't want to anymore because I didn't want to have a conversation with these people because I almost felt insulted that they were pretending to be a fan, not to like it, but to be a fan. I guess is the truth.
See, this boom period is obviously around the time when I had Will, so then I really got back into actually reading. So, in a way, the fact that it was fucking massive made it easier to come in because shops had lots of shit in.
Yeah.
Because it was the in thing. Even now, you go into an HMV, they will have a few racks of comics in there, as well as 50 racks of comic book memorabilia.
Yeah.
Because, useless tat is what sells more than the actual books.
Yeah,
but they're there.
So I'm just looking at the Funko Pops behind me. Yeah, they do. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it really does.
But it's the thing. You go, as you say, in pretty much any shop now, you will see something that references a comic book.
Oh God, yeah. And again, as you say, any shop, isn't it? I mean, any shop of any sort. You go to the supermarket, there'll be superhero stuff in there. You go to, even if you went to like a random, like, I don't know, like, are Debenhams closed? But you go to Debenhams. Debenhams, a place that sells clothes, a place that sells perfume, a place that sells watches. And here are our superhero bit. There won't be comics, but there will be a superhero mugs. There'll be a superhero pants. There'll be all this stuff. And that it is there, isn't it? You cannot move for it anymore. And it is, it's part of the public conscious now, isn't it? And I don't see it going away because I think this got so big that in 30, 40 years time, it's still out there. Like the people are still talking about Iron Man, Thor, Avengers, and obviously anything else that gets made as it goes forward. But this is now big business. However, I come back to big business, but not for the comic books.
Yeah. So I will do a little personal anecdote at this point. So obviously, going back, it was just after Avengers 2 came out. And I was in work, and I pull out. I think it was Batman at the time. I know, Kel surprised. I was reading Batman, and
stereotyping yourself, mate.
And I literally got, "Why are you reading that?" And I was like, "You've gone to see Avengers 4 times in the cinema in 2 weeks." Where do those stories come from? And there was still that
I think
level
right.
of there were people that were so in love with the films that, as I said, they would go and see the same film 3 or 4 times in a cinema, but would look down on what created it.
Well,
So there was still that, even then, with it being bigger than fucking Jesus at the time, still people looking down at like, oh, but comics.
Well, I think like you, I think this is still a dirty little secret for me. Let's say we're kind of looking at the that Avengers or post Avengers 2, and probably I don't know. I think we're probably looking at like early 2010s at this stage. All that gap up to then, a dirty little secret for me still. But probably for different reasons, as I said earlier. One, because I didn't necessarily want to have the conversations with people about it.
Yeah.
But actually, something you said there, there would be there's two things that come out of my next point, I guess, and there would be times where people would be talking about it and they'd be going, "I wonder what this is, and I wonder what that is," and often I wouldn't talk about it because I knew what they were probably going to do because I'd read the comic book story, so I shut the fuck up because I didn't want to spoil it for people. Now, I know they change things around, but you don't want to spoil it. But on the other side of it, I didn't want to be that prick. I didn't want that prick who goes, I know more about it than you. I felt like this was almost an important time. As much as my gut was to reject the mass audience because they were Johnny-come-latelys, I also didn't want to. I wanted them to love it. And I felt like being too overbearing with it might actually impact their... I still was in a somewhat disbelief that it was as popular and it was going to stay as popular. I thought the movie bubble, I thought would burst. Well, I was going to say a lot sooner than it did. It hasn't burst, so obviously a lot sooner than it did.
Yeah.
And I guess I still had some hope that this would convert a lot more people into the reading of it. And I don't felt like I saw it at that point. There probably is more sold in the UK. You see, we talk about the collected editions. There probably is more sold at this stage than there probably ever have been before. But it didn't follow that. The fandom is the fandom of superheroes and movies, isn't it? And then and TV. A very small percentage of it is actual reading comics. TV is an interesting one for me. I actually think things like The Walking Dead coming out, and we said earlier about when Blade came out, and when we said about The Crow, and people didn't know it was a comic book. I think the same thing happened with something like Walking Dead. I think I was much more comfortable saying to people, "Well, did you know this is a comic?" But mainly because I thought people wouldn't know, and not in a smug way, but I thought it might interest them.
Yeah, it's not so blatantly a superhero thing. So
and I feel like some of those TV shows actually probably brought people more into, this is when I saw the Waterstone sections expand, and I think we've seen a mini expansion of, you'd see Cat books in there, Thor books and things like that, but I saw them get a lot bigger with a lot of the Image stuff started to get, because I think they realized that with The Walking Dead they had adult comics again. Let's go with adult comics or grown-up comics, but there was a grown-up audience for it. And I think this kind of the fandom expanded in two ways at the same time. I think it expanded in the acknowledgement and the understanding of the superhero universes and what they are. But I think a lot of those fans just want to play in the movies. They want to play with this is what I know about them because I saw it in a movie. And I think maybe some of the TV shows did bring people. Maybe it's the format of TV shows. It's X amount of episodes.
Yeah.
And you're going to do it weekly, which, comic books are X amount of episodes, and you're going to do it monthly. So maybe that was a bit more conducive to getting people to read more comic books.
But yeah, so still a little bit one of those of like, oh, you wouldn't read it in public because people will scorn you. We'll go up to now.
Yeah.
Because again, I have another one of those being at work moments. It was at Christmas when I went and bought Hawkeye, and obviously a Hawkeye TV show was on at the time.
Yeah.
So I'd gone and bought it, and I sat at my desk at work and was having a quick scan through before going back off a break. And one of the leaders, who a bit older than me, went, that's a TV show, and I was just like, Of course I do.
Yeah.
But this is, and I was just like, what's going on? And then one of the lads that's near me is about 10 years younger than me, and he went, "When you're done with it, can I read it? Because I'm like, I'd rather read that than actually watch a TV show." And I was like, so it's clearly a mix of generations as it is now, where some are quite happy and want to read the source material and go from there, and then others are still very much of that, just watch the TV show. Why are you reading it?
Well, I mean, books, like books. You know, like throughout the years, like I don't know, again, I have had patches of being a big reader. Generally, when I was commuting a lot more, because it's really you're bored on a train reading. But you know, like I would often read a book that is made into a film or is going to be made into a film, and you know, like say if I was in the office on a break and I was reading a book, and people would go, "What are you reading that for?" And I go, "Because I like reading." And then they go, and exactly what you said there, they go, "You do realise that's a film?" Almost as if like the reading of the book was a punishment, and why would I ever do that? Because it's a film. But as I say, the balance fact for me with comics is like I can see why people see a 500-page book and go, "Oh no, I'm not a big reader. That will take me ages to get through, so maybe I won't." But and in comparison to watching a movie for an hour and a half, Whereas with the comic books, I mean, a lot of the stories these are based on, like you could read it in less time than it takes you to watch the movie, because you know it's sequential art, it's pictures with not depend on who you're reading, but not necessarily a ton of dialogue. But I think it is that child thing. But yeah, I to this day, is it a dirty little secret for me anymore? No. I think this is the first time in my life where I'd say it's not a dirty little secret. Partially going back to some of the stuff we said in other eras of our life, I don't give a shit anymore. If I want to read it in front of someone, I'll read it in front of someone purely because I could give two bollocks. Whereas when I said earlier I could give two bollocks, I probably didn't want to have a conversation with that person about it. Whereas now I really am of a right mind of going, if someone started talking to me about it and said aren't they for kids? I just ignore them. I just wouldn't even speak to them. I'm that rude these days. But yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think anything less of. I mean, we do a podcast about it, so clearly I'm fine talking out loud about it. And when we did the Renaissance Men, like we talk about this stuff a lot. I still find that my conversations are limited, though. As in, most of the time when I'm talking out loud about it, I am talking out loud to people who've seen the movies and the TV shows. So I have to temper kind of what I said earlier about not wanting to spoil stuff or not want to kind of overly go into things that may come up in the movies. I find myself almost having to switch on movie universe brain and go, what happened in the movies and what didn't happen in comics? And I do find that now where it's slightly different is because people know I know the comics, they ask me questions. They say, who is this? What's going to happen? And I don't tell them because I go, just watch it. Like, just wait for it to happen. Like, I think you'll enjoy it much more than hearing me tell it. If I was that good at telling them, I'd be bloody writing the things or making the movies. But yeah, so this is probably the first time in my life where I wouldn't consider it a dirty little secret. But and I have been lucky, talking to you. But there was a period somewhere in there, and this is by I think coincidence more than anything else. This is around the beginning of the Marvel movies, but I just so happened to start working with about 4 or 5 people who were also comic book fans. And they were comic book fans who I'd say had a similar trajectory to me, or some of them were like bigger music kids and things like that, maybe than sport. But I don't know, some point, like at work, I think one of them had mentioned it. Do you like comics? And I think we all tiptoed into those conversations of kind of going, don't tell them too much, don't let them know everything. But I did have this conversational group where we could talk comic books. But again, that was more like, and it was lovely. I loved it. I don't think I'd be doing this with you now if I hadn't had that. Because I don't think I'd still feel quite as comfortable about talking about it. But yeah, like it's amazing. The fandom is immense now. So during this period, one of the things I will say, and this is probably from, like, let's say the late 2000s onwards. And these things did exist before then, but I think from the late 2000s onwards, part of me not feeling a part of a fandom where I had those people to hand. Some of that was on me, because I do think there was easy options for me. So, we said earlier about the internet. There were like forums, pages, podcast groups. Comic cons were going on regularly all around the country. And as I say, I know they were happening before that, but they've become far more kind of acceptable and in reach for me.
Yeah.
But I think because I'd been apart from the fandom, the actual fandom of comics for so long, I wasn't in the frame of mind to kind of go and seek it out. I was almost like, no, this is my thing now. I don't need the others anymore. Like, I'm not seeking that group to do it. It would be nice if it happened by accident. But so, yeah, I do think there were opportunities out there. But again, a small percentage of the grander superhero fandom were those who were looking for comic books. Because I look at those Comic Cons and I think to a large part, people are going to find out what the next movie is, what the next TV show is, rather than going there to talk about what the next comic book story is.
Yeah. So I've looked at like Comic Con and stuff, and I'm like, I don't think I could take myself to one, because I'm just like in that weird sort of thing of like, I'm quite happy to be in a field full of metalheads and throw myself around. I don't think I'd feel comfortable in there, because it's one of those because I wouldn't do the dressing up and all that sort of shit. But am I buying in enough? Am I showing my love enough?
I think,
yeah, that's
I
a weird
fancy
one.
doing it once. Like I think I fancy doing it for the experience. But yeah, it's not something that fills me with like desire, because I go, it's strange. One of the only other things that is like this, and this is not a fandom, this is more of an addiction. But over my years, I've met a lot of people through smoking a cigarette, even more so since they were banned in places. So yes. I wouldn't necessarily walk into. I'm not the person who walks into a room and go, "Ta-da! Look at me. Let's talk." I'll talk to all the strangers.
Yeah.
If I'm on a night out though, and I am outside and there is a smoker, I will talk to them, and vice versa, because we know we have that thing in common, and that's cigarettes. And I think a Comic-Con in theory should be like that for me. It should be like you're being thrust into a room of thousands of people who have something in common. So you've got that barrier out the way. But almost, I think, for me, it was a little bit too much.
Yeah.
I go, well, like, who do I pick to speak to? I'm not going to go up and randomly talk to all of these 2,000 people. And yeah, possibly a bit of overkill for me. But yeah, I do think there were outlets for me if I'd wanted to go that route. But I don't want to make out as if this was a bleak, sad existence where I was in my reading corner and there weren't options for me. I know there were options, but I think those options come at a point where I didn't want those options anymore. I wanted to find people naturally, in the same way as music. You and I are big music fans, different genres for a lot of stuff, but there's nothing quite like being in a pub and you start talking about an album you've heard that you really liked, and then the person next to you goes, "Oh, I've listened to that, it's brilliant." And I think I wanted that with comics, rather than put into a room of people and argue about who's stronger, like Hulk or Thor. That's not what I wanted out of my fandom, I don't think.
Yeah. So, as we've sort of both said, it is now that point where for both of us, it's no longer a daily or so. I will quite happily sit in a pub on a Friday afternoon with a beer and a comic, and sit there and give two fucks. It's no different than the old boy sitting in the corner reading his paper.
Yeah.
Well,
and to be honest, like the fucking quality of newspapers, you're getting a lot more insightful views of the world in one of these kids' comics than you do in some of the trash that's released in the press. Do you feel like, as a fan or as part of this fandom, that you're still quite insular with it? Because I do. I don't feel like. Well, other than this podcast, I guess, but I don't feel like I go to places and say, "All right, everyone, you might want to try this. You'd like this." I think I still am reluctant to push my fandom on others.
Yeah, I said I don't. I'm like you. I wouldn't go round waving a giant flag, going, "I read comics. I read comics." Yeah. But then, other than metal, because I'm 99% of the time in a band T-shirt. I don't go around waving I like anything, to be fair. Because I don't like people and I don't really like the interaction.
Yeah.
Is one of the things.
And yeah, like my love of it and wanting other people to get that love is slightly less powerful than my I don't really want to talk to people right now because they'll get on my nerves. I'll just go and read a comic on my own, I think.
Yeah, so it's like with my mates and stuff, especially the ones that love the films and go on about the films, I will sort of try and sort of talk to them and go like, just read some of this stuff, like we have on here, of like sort of try this one.
Yeah.
And so my mates, I will pepper them and pester them with read the source material, find out new things.
Certainly, as I say, I don't think I'm very proactive with it, but with the movies and the TVs, and possibly again doing the Renaissance Men podcast more than even this one, I think I did start to kind of lean into that a bit of going, if you like this, you'll really like it when you get to read the rest of the story or something like that. And I think it's still very, very difficult. This fandom base. So I know we talk about fandom. One thing I wanted to pick up on, you said it earlier, and I look at fandom now, and to a large part, as I say, I think there's a divisible line between superhero fandom and, let's say, comic fandom. Superhero fandom's raging, and I think it's now in the public consciousness forever, but hasn't done a lot for comic book sales and the comic book industry necessarily. Although, I guess you can argue it's probably made it more sustainable because you can't make those movies unless it has the printed source material, although I'm sure some dickhead along the line is going to suggest that you can, but then I think you're missing a real trick there. But I think that comic fandom's all right. And when I say it's all right, I look at like my nieces now, and I'm not, they don't read comics, I'll be honest, but they know comics and they like the idea of comics. I think they don't read it because they're just not in their eye line. They haven't got a comic shop near them. But that they will. I would say that they like manga, and as you mentioned it earlier, I think manga was a great thing for comic book fandom, and I think, the people who are, let's say, between like 12 and 20 now, I think there's enough of a solid core in that generation that will carry on buying this stuff, that, as we said, I think that generational gap is fine. I think it's coming through, and as I say, I like that degree of the fandom. I think maybe, as much as I want it to be mainstream, but I want it to be mainstream because I'd love these creators to make the sort of money that
they deserve.
And some much lesser talented creators make for other things that they do. But I'd argue, and maybe another podcast and under another name, that's where I could equate the same thing to music. I could equate the same thing to wrestling. I think some of the least talented people make the most money. But I think it's in safe hands. But I still don't think it'll be the movie fandom that's come along with it, or the TV show fandom that's necessarily going to save the industry. And as one of the, let's say, the small percent, I imagine people watching this probably would initially be the small percent. God bless you and keep going, because as much as at times in my life it had been an insular, I was almost going to say solo, that sounded a bit sad, but an insular kind of fandom that I was part of. I bloody love being part of it, and I think it is good. And when you do meet someone, when you genuinely meet someone who loves them and you get to start talking about it, I think it's actually even better because of that.
Yeah.
Because you've been so starved of conversation about it for so long. You must go, yes, I love you. There was a bit a couple of years ago. I'm a big American football fan, although I fell off a little bit in lockdown period because I didn't like about the crowds. And again, I've got a few friends who really like NFL, which is great. But generally, like, other than that group of friends, I didn't really have anyone to talk about it. And I went on my brother's stag do, and he sort of said, and I didn't know anyone on it, and he sort of said, "Oh, don't worry about it." And I can't remember the lad's name, but he said, "You'll get on great with so and so, whatever his name was, because he likes the NFL as well." And so I get in the pub. Well, I say I get in the pub. I turned up about 6 hours before everyone else and started drinking because I had some time to kill. But when they come in the pub, like, you know, I said hello. And then I got introduced to this guy and I went, oh, brilliant. I kind of zeroed in on him. because I went, he has the same hobby as me.
Yeah.
And like I went straight into like what was probably quite an obsessive, in-depth knowledge of current NFL at the time. And within about a minute, I'd seen him glaze over because I think he watched it casually every now and again, and I just bombarded him. And that's the thing that's why I think it's genuinely great when you talk to someone who has the love of it that you do, because you don't see that glazed over look. You don't see them going, "Oh fuck, you know, here he goes again. He's going to tell me about Captain America 183, and I'm going to have to pretend that I care."
Yeah, the thing is, I equate it a lot with wrestling.
Yes.
This is something that obviously on the show we've done a lot, but you know, there have been periods when it's been quite easy for me to openly talk about wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s with Hogan, the Attitude Era, and then, you know, a few bits here and there where it becomes mainstream again.
Yeah.
But then I got to a point, 10 years ago or so, where I started a podcast, or jumped into a podcast about wrestling and talk about it. And there is a massive amount of people that love wrestling.
Yeah.
I don't go to the point where some do. You know, I don't live and die by it. But it is one of those, like, as you said, with NFL.
You say you don't say your prayers and take your vitamins?
No.
Whoa.
I don't, because, you know, I don't take the word of a racist.
That's a good point. Good point, well made.
But, you know, it's that thing of, like, I know this, obviously, the show is about comics, but it's that point of whatever it is that you like.
Yeah.
Finding people that have that same joy that you get of those same things. Which, you know, stops whatever it is being a dirty secret.
Yeah, and you know, like we've used that term a lot, and I think if I could, if I go back in time, I probably wouldn't do any of what I'm about to say, because I'd probably go back in time and buy stocks and shares in every company that's going to make me a billionaire at this point. But I would want to have a word. And again, I was quite, you know, like all kids growing up, right into kind of like teen years and then into like early 20s and things like that. I wasn't like confident all the time. I felt there's periods where I felt pretty good, like about myself, but not like in a cocky way, you know. Like, and I think I learned very early on that I'm not really here to impress others. Like, if they like me, they like me. If they don't, they don't. But I would still have a word with myself and say, don't hide these things away because you love them. And who gives a shit whether someone kind of is a prick to you about it? And you know, like, I guess that like an encompassing thing for me with this as a fandom of going, it's probably a lot easier than it's ever been in your life to say I like comic books. It's still not totally easy though, because as much as it permeates it, you said it earlier, I sit in the office and I could have people talk for 3 hours around me about Hawkeye, the last TV show, and I go, oh yeah, it's a really good comic book, and people would, and quite a few of them would turn around and go, you've read the comic. So there's still that kind of out there, but I think it is the love the fandom that you love, and yeah, you know, like we do live in a world. Take out the Comic-Con stuff, but we do live in the world of the internet. God, this is almost sounding like I'm turning into a fucking internet groomer here, but you know, we do live in the world of the internet, and there are easy ways, I think, to make connections with people who share your loves. Now. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll get on with them. You know, it doesn't. Like, there are assholes out there in every fandom. But yeah, I would say really kind of embrace it. Embrace your love for it. Because, I mean, that's the important thing, I think, in any of this stuff is getting some enjoyment, getting some real love out of any hobby is the key. You know, life's shit sometimes. You know, we've seen it a lot recently. And I think these are the sort of things that level us back out again. And yeah, God, you know, like I think it was Mid put it up the other day on one of our group chats of it's the someone judging me for spending 10 hours playing a video game, and that same person binge watching a TV show for 10 hours. And you're right. There's nothing is more worthy than the other, I would say, because they're both things you love. But yeah, like a great hobby. Although, as I say, a secret fandom for me for so long, and a shame. I think that I just didn't. And partly what I said earlier, geographically, I just don't think. I think if I'd lived in a city, I think I'd have had a much better chance of meeting people who shared my love and maybe having that connectivity. But it is also a good solo sport. Reading comics is. I mean, I guess there might be people who sit there in a room and read out loud and do the voices and things like that. Each to their own. But it is something you can do on your own. So yeah, you can keep the fandom to yourself.
Yeah, as I said, it's one of those. I'm happy that Will likes it, because whenever he's around me, he will normally grab whatever I've just finished reading and start reading through it. We got into the Scott Pilgrim books for Christmas, so he's got the whole lot of those. He's reading through them. It's not one that I will force. I'm not going to force anything on him, but
no,
it's there, and if he wants to, he can.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way. Is just encourage.
And I think as a parent, I think that's probably true, isn't it? Of going, yeah, okay, that other kids can be assholes, and there's certain ways we can go. You can probably make your life a bit easier, but I think that's ultimately, isn't it? Is you want to encourage people to experience loads of stuff, and then actually continue to do the stuff they enjoyed.
Yeah,
and for me, comics was that, and I say comics was that, wrestling was that, booze was that, music was that, TV was that. Movies with that, and it's great. And over the years, I've spent far more time talking about movies and TV than I have comic books, because it's just a lot easier in the world. People do tend to have experienced the same sort of stuff. But is there a chance? How do I phrase this? Is there a chance that us as a fandom limit the fandom? And I guess I'm going to make this more simplistically. Are we elitist arseholes, and do we, with our elitist arsehole ways, put people off of it?
Yes and no.
That's what I feel like as well, yeah.
Because there are... I wouldn't say we are.
No.
But how we come across. But there are a lot of people that, the lot that go to Comic-Cons, and they're in like all the, as I said, the reason I wouldn't go, because they're in the full fucking get-ups, and what do you mean you haven't read all 6,000 issues of this? How do you not know every backstory of every character ever?
Yeah,
there are always going to be those people. But then that's the same for fucking everything,
Yeah.
You get that even more so in music with, what do you mean you didn't like the first 3 albums before they were signed, when they were an underground Scandinavian death metal punk band?
I think like you get that kind of terminology, don't you? Like gatekeepers.
Yeah.
People who no matter, like they almost don't want to. So, and I touched on it earlier, whereas I hope I'm not that, but I do think I've had my moments, because as I say, I think when the movies first started coming out, and all of a sudden I'm hearing people sat next to me who I know have never read a comic start talking about Captain America as if they know a lot about Captain America. I think that crept into me. It's almost like, fuck off. You know nothing of Captain America. So I could feel that bubbling up. But I think, in general, it's certainly something I don't try. But I do think that there's a big risk, isn't there, of people trying to go, no. Like I said earlier, like one of the shames for me is that it's not as big as I feel like it should be for as good as it is. And I don't think people should be forced, but I wish people loved it more. But I think there's got to be a flip side of that, hasn't there, in fandom, of people who go in, I like that it's niche. And I don't want people to come into this fandom.
I think part of the problem is because as a whole, it is still got the stigma of geeky kids that have no friends and pocket protectors and all that sort of bollocks. There is still those kids that are a bit geeky, not to that sort of, the pin-up level of what, they picture them as, but it's their safe space. It's their safe, I can be me here. And, I think whilst the medium as a whole is the same with, if you think like the D&D lots and the sort of the role-play board game guys, that same sort of level of fan that does that isn't going to want the masses in, because that's where they're safe and they're not picked on for being a bit, and I don't mean that you like the term, but being a bit weird.
Well, and the thing is like, for those that like, let's sort of break it down to like an American movie kind of level of that person who was an arsehole to you as a kid because you liked D&D or you liked wrestling or you liked whatever.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to be in a pub with them years later talking to them about that hobby, because you're almost going, how fucking dare you? You made me feel like shit when I was a kid for this, and now it's socially acceptable, or it's part of the zeitgeist. Now you can do it. Like, so yeah, I can kind of see it. I can kind of see why people do put up barriers. I think, to be honest though, like most things in life, I think realistically, going back to the dirty little secret thing again of going, I think if people talked about it out loud more, or had talked about it out loud more when we were younger, I think it makes it more. God, I'm talking about this like it's the civil rights movement or something like that. But it makes it more socially acceptable, doesn't it? And I think like sometimes it takes the brave person to say, I like comics. Like as I said, when I was growing up, I was a Sporto kid, and actually, maybe there's probably kids that are around me that probably did even do the same things as me, but maybe they didn't feel like they could say it. And maybe if I'd have said it, it would have encouraged it more. But so I'm meandering away from the point of going. Yes, I do think there's some elitism in there, and but yeah, I think you made the perfect point there of going. I don't think there's a fandom of anything where you don't find that, and we'll let the audience decide whether comic book fans are more likely to be a prick than other fandoms. But I think it would surprise me. I think music was one of the key ones. I think certain areas of the music fandom are most likely to be prickish.
Any extreme subculture of metal, high level prickery of fucking a lot of gatekeeping. That the whole sort of name. See someone in a t-shirt, name 3 songs, sort of level shit.
Go back to the origin of this show, though. I mean, that's bullshit. I was just about to make a lie up about the origin of the show. The origin of the show was we wanted to talk about comic books.
Yeah.
But I think when we started to kind of talk about like what this show could be, I think one of the things that we hoped is that whoever it is, like being people coming from the Renaissance Men podcast, where we talk more about TV and movies, or some of our video gaming stuff, is that it might just make them interested in a hobby, and that might make, even if it's like 1 in 20 picks up a comic book and finds that love that we have. I think that was the important thing to us of going, we love it and we hope other people love it. That's my kind of real big altruistic part of the fandom now, of going, my fandom is my fandom, but I think a lot of other people would enjoy it. They just need to take that little tippy toe into it, but I have to be careful how you encourage them to take a tiptoe in it, because it's really easy to sound like an elitist prick when you go, oh, why the hell don't you read this? Well, you should be. And but comic books, dudes, read them.
Yes,
fucking ace. And we've covered it in other shows. There is so much different product out there. We mentioned it a few times in this: grown-up comics, superhero comics as the kid comics, or whatever. But even within the genres, even within like any of the superheroes, there is some amazing stuff written. There's some trash. There's some in between. There's stuff for kids. There's stuff for grown-ups. There's stuff for kids who are grown-ups. It's all out there, all at the end of your fingertips, if you want it.
So on that note, I can't think of a better way of finishing the show. Seddon, it is wonderful, and we shall return next week with more.